Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Taipei Salon. My name is Melanie, and I am a volunteer for the Long Ying Tai Cultural Foundation, and I'm here to open the event today. The mission of the Long Ying Tai Cultural Foundation is to highlight international issues and youth development. We hope to create a communication platform for civil society and also to help everyone come one step closer to becoming global citizens. Firstly, we would like to thank our hardworking volunteers for making this event possible. Lots of people contributed to every aspect of this event, including the brochures that you're holding in your hands. Can everyone please give all the staff and volunteers of the foundation a huge round of applause? We will also be holding a new China series this June and July. If you would like to be a part of it, please take out the green form inside your booklet, and you can sign up today. The first event of the China series will be on June 20th, and it's going to be really, really interesting. So we will be talking about the Cultural Revolution, so photographs taken from the Cultural Revolution, education reform in 1977, as well as the future of China. We hope to see you all there. As a nonprofit organization, hosting these events requires everyone's generous support, so we can continue to do this. We welcome any donations to support these stellar events. And now we are ready for the big event. Today's talk is called No Babies? What Went Wrong? A talk about the fertility rate in Taiwan and beyond. We are honored to invite Associate Dean Stuart Jattel Baston from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology as our speaker today. And please, can everyone give a warm welcome to Professor Helen Liu from the National Taiwan University. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, full of energies. We're going to talk about something very important, and it's my honor today to be the moderator for this event, to give a brief introductions of our speaker today. Professor Stuart Gustav Baston is actually got his PhD in the University of Cambridge, and then later joined the University of Oxford as a associate professor of social policy. He's currently the associate dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science, and also a professor of social science and public policy of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. So it is really our great honor to have such wonderful scholar come from all the way from Hong Kong to share his international experiences on populations and developmental issues. In particular, he's very well knowledge in this area. He actually served as an advisor for the population and development for the Parliamentary Office in UK, and he's also a research fellow in Austria. So you can see he has a lot of experience in Europe, but his recent research specialty focus on Asian. Recently, I just shared he has a lot of wonderful news. His promotions in his department, and also he just won a $1 million grant to carry on continuously on this very important issue in Asia and the population and low fertility. His research focus on the consequence and problems of the low fertility issues in Asia. For instance, he studied the fertility preferences in Beijing and Taipei. He also looked into the gender selections in abortion in Nepal. And he also compared the youth transitions in Europe and Asia. So it is really our great honor to have such a speakers to come to give us all those international perspective on this particular very important issue. More importantly, he recently published a new book on why demography matters. And in this particular book, he set up a very optimistic outlook to deal with a very pessimistic issues and concerns. And I want to give you some quotes and the main things that evolve around these books. Well, his book pointed out that how sometimes data quality might actually affect our forecast on population, on developmental issue, how we address the population issue. But more importantly, he talked about how there's no such a thing, as a destinies, because ourselves will shape our own life. And he also talked about how we can use new methods and new thinkings to deal with population issues or low fertility issue all around the world. And he talked about in these books, there's a lot of uncertainty of the future. There's a lot of things we don't know what will happen in the future. However, the decision we make today will actually guide us to a better future. So please join me to welcome Professor Stuart Gusel-Benson to share his knowledge on the population issue and how we can address them, how we can take our future into our hand today. Please join me and welcome him.
Yeah. Wow, thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me okay with this this thing? It makes me feel like a motivational speaker or something. I'm going to tell you how to get rich and have a wonderful life. Of course, I want to just say thank you very much to Professor Long, to everyone at the foundation, to Helen. I can't believe she did that at the top of her head. That's amazing. My life is in your head. Isn't that awful? You should get rid of it now. But also, thank you very much for you. I can't believe it. It's a Sunday afternoon, and here you are, listening to me talk about demography. And what makes this even more unusual is because, of course, demography and demographers, we're not very popular, because whatever population issue there is, it always seems to be wrong. There's either too many people, we've got too many people in the world, it's too crowded, there's too much of a problem in the world, we've got too many young people, we've got too many migrants, or we haven't got enough people in the world, there's not enough people, there's too many old people, right? We're facing extinction and decline. And so it's a little bit depressing, and that's why I don't normally get invited to give big lectures, because people always say, you know, this is very depressing, very miserable, particularly on a Sunday. So anyway, I shall be talking about this, a population problem in Taiwan and Pacific Asia. Now, of course, in this part of the world, we tend to concern ourselves rather more with two particular issues, right? The first is related to population aging, okay? We see that population aging as being this kind of existential crisis. This is going to cause such damage to our economy, to society, to everything. You know, this poor guy here under the weight of Japan's burden, whether it's in Japan or in Hong Kong or here or where, or in South Korea. It's seen, of course, to be one of the big threats to mainland China's perceived role as the world's #1 economy in the 21st century. Well, either between that or Mr. Trump. But anyway, let's not go down that route at all. And of course, when we look for Taiwan, here's a nice big graph from the NDC. And yeah, we can see we're at something of a crossover point in Taiwan's history, where the number of people who, with demographers, we classically think of as being old age, and I'll come back to that in a minute, age 65 and above, is just switching over now. Okay, and that we see compared to the young age population. So by 2065, a very large proportion of the Taiwanese population will be aged over 65. But of course, it's not just about getting old. It's also this idea of population stagnation and even extinction. Okay, for those of you who can read Korean, this is the dates or the years in which particular cities in South Korea will become extinct if the birth rates stay constant until the rest of the time. So poor old Busan, if you like Busan, that's the first to go in 2413. Now, of course, this is completely ridiculous. Busan is not going to disappear in 2413, right? And none of us will be around anyway, so we don't really need to care about that too much. The Japanese take it to the next level and calculate to the second the date at which there will only be one person left in Japan. I like how they specify it's got to be around 15 years old, because obviously the rest of this is completely believable. Luckily, when I calculated this a couple of months ago, it's going to occur here at about 3 o'clock in the morning. So everyone will be asleep anyway. We don't need to worry about when Japan becomes extinct. Now, when we look at this map, this graph for Taiwan, for the total population of Taiwan, we can see a nice, going from the 1970s up and up and up. Sorry, I've got short legs, so it's very difficult for me to reach. So everything's going up and up and up, and then it goes down and down and down and down. Now, this is again from the NDC. Now, I should say, don't worry too much, because that doesn't. If you just carry that on, that means that we're all going to be gone here by like 2080. No, don't panic, because there's a little. This here is quite important, right? There's another 17 million missing, so we're not going to drop off. We're not going to completely disappear this century anyway. So those are these two big issues that we face, and as within demography, there's essentially three main drivers of these changes. The first one is mortality. Now, as a general rule, less mortality is kind of good, right? Because as a general rule, we don't really like dying. So if we can die less, generally for humanity, that's a pretty good thing. And so, of course, population aging is a real positive thing, because it just means that fewer people are dying, right? So that's a good thing, right? We can say. Migration, that becomes a bit more tricky politically, culturally, and so on. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But the primary driver of population aging, stagnation, decline is about fertility. Yeah? And when I talk about fertility rates, I really mean like the birth rate, so the number of children that people have. And of course, this concern about fertility rates is something which is well known. Okay? The fall in birth rates have made a significant impact on our already growing population over the recent years. This phenomenon will indeed cripple our cities' development. The Taipei mayor from a few years ago. I'm sure this quote is familiar to you. The low birth rate is a national security issue. Yeah? It's not something we should be a little bit worried about. This is a national security issue. And so in response to this, the government must not be idle, and that national security level measures should be taken, right? So this is pretty full on, right? This is pretty big. And of course, it's not just in Taiwan. This is all over this part of the world. We see many, many different policies that have been brought in this part of the world to encourage people to have more children, right? In Singapore, the amount of money that is transferred from the state to families is enormous in terms of direct baby benefits or baby bonuses, but also indirect things related to tax relief and housing and so on. In South Korea, tremendous amount of money has been invested both in terms of traditional social welfare, but also childcare and other baby bonuses. But then you have these other plans. So in South Korea, they decided on one particular Wednesday a few years ago, they're going to switch the lights off so everybody can go home, and just imaginative, I suppose. And if you really want to, if you've got nothing better to do, there's actually, it really makes me cringe. In Singapore, there's actually a rap. They did an online rap about, and yeah, I know, I can hear it was just sinking. I know. It was actually sponsored by Mentos for some bizarre reason. You know, the little sweets, a little bit. I have no idea why. But anyway, maybe your breath smells better. You're more likely to have a. Oh, anyway, let's not dwell on that. But this is these kind of like these ideas for increasing the fertility rate. Wow, people in Japan are being paid to have babies, and it seems to be working. Yes, we don't need to worry about this anymore. Oh, okay, never mind. Fertility rate went up a little bit and then went down again afterwards. Okay, all right, that's Japan. Don't worry about this. Okay, let's look in Singapore. Hooray! Singapore's fertility rate looking up, it's going up, you know, everything's going well, hooray, now that's great. This is the fertility rate here. It's not really the kind of upward trend that you will be looking for if you wanted. This is the average number of, simply put, the average number of children per woman, and it's kind of going down. It's not really going up. And we see this in all these different regions of Pacific Asia. South Korea now has the lowest in the world, one of the lowest fertility rates ever recorded. It's about as low as East Germany just before the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was one of the lowest ever seen. And of course, here in Taiwan, we've seen this move, as this book chapter from Li Mei-lin said, you know, the transition from anti-natalist to pro-natalist policies. So a move away from encouraging people to have fewer children to encouraging people to have more children. And lots of various different policies, either at the national level, but also at the subnational level, at the city level, at the provincial level. And how has this worked out? Eek. Well, unfortunately, if we measured this purely by the fertility rate, it's not gone so well. The recent report here, Taiwan's fertility rate is the lowest in the world at 1.218. Now, the Taiwan government challenged this. They said, no, that's not fair to say the fertility rate is 1.218, and it's not fair to say it's the lowest in the world. The fertility rate is actually lower than 1.218. The fertility rate is actually 1.06. And if you look, South Korea's got the lowest in the world, not us, if you do the proper calculation. So that's a kind of it's not the best argument to win, right? You know, but the principle is still there. The principle is still there. And so we have this idea about how all of these things link together, right? That we see this very low fertility rate is presented as a national security threat. And of course, who is then responsible for this national security threat? Well, it's you, for not having the adequate number of children. You are the national security threat. You are the new missile, the big red button, right? This is you. This is your fault. And the problem is that this is not something that's familiar to, that's unique to Taiwan. This is something we see in all different parts of the world, that there's this association between just not doing what you should be doing, right? That childless millennials are selfish. Well, you know, we would use a different word where I'm from in the East Midlands, in Nottinghamshire. But anyway, you get the gist, right? That basically you're more interested in buying avocado on toast and drip coffee than having children, okay? And this is kind of the way that this is sometimes presented. You're more interested in staying at home, living, you know, being a parasite single, living with your mother, playing video games, you know, or not even interested in dating at all. These kind of herbivore males, you know, grass-eating men in Japan who are not interested in having sex or dating or anything like this. What else? You know, oh, look at this sad thing. Oh, everybody's given up. You know, they're not interested in Korea. Korea, they take it to another level. You've given up, you have the Sampo generation who've given up, you can't see this, but courtship, marriage and children. Then you give up employment and home ownership. Then you give up interpersonal relationships. And then you give up hope. But it's really depressing. Right? This is so sad. But this is the kind, it seems acceptable to say these kinds of things. I think it's awful. I think it's crazy as well. This is from Hong Kong. This idea that women are more interested in consumption goods. They're more interested in luxury items rather than. So it's very difficult to say that without looking at women around, because I'm just going to look at. I'll look straight in the camera. That it's this really kind of toxic narrative. But this is not just in the newspaper. These days, God, it's always a bad sign when somebody begins a sentence with these days, you know. It's always, you know, it's never going to end, oh, these days, these days. Young people don't get married. They're selfish and they don't want to get married. It seems like the most basic social unit, the family, is crumbling. This is from South Korea. Now, okay, maybe we might expect this because this is a conservative assemblyman. The young appear to prefer to invest limited resources and capital on themselves to fully enjoy their life rather than form a family. Now, that's a professor. That's not the media. That's not some conservative guy in Seoul. This is a professor. Perhaps people in Korea are becoming selfish since they don't want children of their own, but expect society to provide more and more children in the hope that their own elderly life will be socially and financially secure. This is the last one. A counter-traditional individualism has liberated young Asian, particularly women, to indulge themselves in the personal pursuit of hedonistic culture, foregoing traditional family values and obligations. So this is it. Avocado on toast and drip coffee. This is the hedonistic culture which is breaking down family society in Pacific Asia. So then when we look at all that, we don't stand a chance. Yeah, this is the way that this view is presented, that this move towards individualism and hedonism and kind of, I have to say, I've never once been in South Korea and felt this is a hedonistic culture. But anyway, you know, and that we don't stand a chance. Yeah, that we have this silver tsunami. We're not going to be able to change aging. It's just going to wash over us. Yeah, and similarly, we're just going to become extinct. Yeah, those graphs, the Japanese, the Koreans were right, that we're going to go the way of the dinosaur, and rather than this kind of, you know, meteor wiping us out, it'll just be this very slow drip of expensive drip coffee that we're buying instead of having children. Right? This is how this is presented. Now, you may have noticed I don't really buy this. Yeah, I don't really believe this. And I want to try to explain a little bit of the reason why. The problem is that we've taken a demographic problem, so-called, about aging and population decline, and then tried to look for demographic solutions to that problem. We're keeping it all internal, right? A linear problem or linear issue. Now, of course, the problem with that is that we've not very well defined how or what the problem actually is. And until we do that, it's very difficult to us to best to determine the answers to that. We're terrified of the number of people aged 65 and above, right? And yet this is kind of weird because, I mean, I'm not 65, but I just imagine that, you know, when you're 64, and 364 days old, you know, you're fine like this, walking along. And then on your 65th birthday at midnight, oh my God, you know, oh, nothing works anymore, and I'm miserable, and I'm going to just leech off the state, and I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to get cancer. This is crazy. It doesn't work like that. Right? And yet this is the assumption that we've built up, that something major happens at age 65. We should be worried about age 65 and above. The second problem, which has not appeared to be very well considered among people who are pushing us all to have more children, is that babies don't work. They really don't. I mean, not these days. I mean, okay, we could start putting 4-year-olds down coal mines, but we don't have coal mines anymore, so we can't even do that. You know, 4-year-olds can't become data scientists, which is what all of my students seem to want to become these days. So, of course, if you're born today in 2019, you're not going to enter the labour market until 2039, probably, maybe a bit later. Now, of course, making a plan for 20 years down the line is very unusual for government. But the also kind of unusual thing is that the labour market will be completely different in 20 years' time. And this is what I'll come back to a little bit later when I talk about demographic metabolism. That yes, populations are getting older, but they're also getting healthier and richer and more skilled and more productive and more educated. So we can be kind of positive about that. So my argument is that instead of just considering things internally as a kind of a population issue, we always have to consider it about how the characteristics of the population change, but also the institutions. One thing people say a lot in Taiwan, actually, we've got to be really worried because there's going to be much fewer young people, and so that's going to be a problem for the military, right? How are we going to sustain the military? Well, it's definitely true that there are going to be a lot fewer younger people, but the characteristics of those younger people are changing as well. They're better educated, they're healthier, they're fitter, they're maybe even more, they could become better soldiers, right? But also, the institution's changing as well. In the army these days, you don't really need that many people. We don't fight each other with sticks and knives face to face. We have drones and things, you know, and bombs and weapons going all the way around the world. So you don't need hundreds of thousands of people to do that, yeah? So we always have to think in this three-dimensional way. Now, I've got some nice things to say about the National Development Commission. Is there anybody here from the National Development Commission? Oh, that's a shame, because they're actually doing a really good job, in as much as they have a multi-dimensional approach to trying to deal with population aging, and that's a very good thing, yeah? In terms of raising labour productivity, in terms of making society friendlier, and all of these other different issues. So they're actually doing a really great job in looking at this and considering this in a holistic way, in a multidisciplinary way. But at the same time, they can't resist encouraging people to have more children, yeah? Now, I would say, oh no, something's gone wrong. What's happened? My clicker's not working anymore. That's it. You try to be nice to the government, and then this is, and then here we go. Right, that's it. Okay, so what I'm saying is that when we try to look at a demographic solution to a demographic problem, it's not going to work, okay? It's unlikely to work. We have to think multidimensionally, and then we can solve a lot of these different issues relating to labour productivity and related to aging and stagnation and so on. And I think that this toxic narrative of blaming people and of selfishness is profoundly unhelpful. So then, should we just forget about fertility? Let's just reform the pension system. Let's just improve productivity. Well, not so fast, okay? I wouldn't say that. Because the first reason, of course, is that if fertility was a little bit higher, then it would change the dynamics, you know, because everything is changed very, very quickly, right? And it might make reform a little bit easier. But actually, what I want to argue is that one of the reasons why we should focus back on fertility is not just to increase the fertility rate for its own sake, but it's because people would like to have more children than they have. All of the surveys suggest that we know, that we've used recently, suggest that people would like to have more children than they end up having. Yeah? Very few people say, you know, at age 18 or 19 or 20, I only want to have one child. Right? A lot of people say they want to have 2 children. People want to get into relationships, whether it's in marriage or other long-term cohabiting relationships. And people want to balance work and family. Of course, this is a stupid picture because it's got a picture of a man. For men, it's very easy to balance work and family because you just work, right? But and this is under the current scenario, right? But if you put a woman there, it becomes much more difficult. So how have we got from this situation where people want to get married, they want to have children, they want to balance work and family, but they're not getting married, right? Where fertility is very low, where we see that although people say, I want to have 2 children, by the time they have one, most say, I'm done, I don't want to have any more, right? Or half the people say, I'm done, I don't want to have any more children. So this, I would say, I think this is the real population problem, yeah? So the old view was to say, okay, low fertility is bad. Low fertility leads to aging and stagnation. So we've got to fix low fertility. And it's not really worked very well. I would argue that actually the real problem is that people don't feel they're able to do what they would like to do. They can't meet their own aspirations. So the gap between what people would like to do and what people feel they're able to do, I think that's where the problem is. And that's where we should focus on. And so it's not that that's the problem itself, but it's more that this is the consequence of other problems, yeah, of other issues in society. And let me just talk a little bit about what that means. This is the kind of weird part in the talk where me, as an English man, explains to Taiwanese women why they're not having children. This is ridiculous, all right? But anyway, but there are, there's a kind of, but this is similar issues all around the world, right? So it's not just particular to Taiwan, right? So of course, we think about the direct costs and the indirect costs of having children, yeah? So the direct costs in terms of the cost of education, childcare, consumption, buying stuff, you know, just buying stuff for children. But then we also think about the indirect costs, yeah, or the opportunity costs. So if your career is going very well, you know, your earnings are going up, and all of a sudden you have your child, and then it just stops, and then you kind of go along, and then maybe then you go back to work, and then maybe have another child, and it stops, and actually more likely you'll leave the labour market, right? So that gap between, it's very difficult doing imaginary graphs back to front, I'm sorry, but so the gap between that trajectory and, quite frankly, a man's trajectory is what we would think of as the opportunity cost. And of course, to make matters even worse, even if you didn't have children, woman's salary will be lower than a man's salary anyway. But that's just sexism that we have to live with, apparently, in different parts of the world. Okay, so we have these direct costs and these indirect costs. And of course, the policies that have been implemented so far tend to focus on financial transfers, right? Of just trying to cut these direct costs. Yeah, but there's other issues as well that we need to focus on. Because, you know, these days, it's kind of, there's many barriers to entry in terms of starting a family, right? In different, not just in Taiwan, but in all different parts of the world. The job that I have, okay, I have a job until I retire. It's kind of difficult for me to get fired. I've got a pension, yeah? I've got annual leave, I've got everything. I've got an old-fashioned job, yeah? Those jobs are pretty rare these days. You know, graduate jobs have changed. The job market, we call the dualization of the job market, of the labour market, where you've got lucky people like me and civil servants, for example, some people who work in big corporations, and then a more fragile, precarious work as well. Well, if you're risk averse, that's going to be very difficult, right? That's very problematic for you to make big, major life decisions about the cost of property. It's nice when you start a family to start off in your own new house or your own flat. Well, if you can never afford to buy a flat or even afford the deposit on a flat or the rent for a flat, that's very difficult. It's very difficult to get started. The costs of marriage, just even the physical cost, the actual out-of-pocket expenses of getting married, right? It's not cheap. But then we think about work culture, dating culture, family expectations, gender roles. All these different things are crucially important to understanding why there is this gap between aspiration and reality. Yeah? And of course, not all of these things can be dealt with by the government. Yeah? Although in Singapore, they tried to get involved in dating culture with mixed results, let's just say that, okay? But it's a very, very multidimensional issue. And of course, each person will have their own configurations. It'll be different for everybody. You talk to 100 people about why they didn't have a second child when they wanted to, they will give you 100 different reasons. Yeah? Some people would say it's about their job, some people would say that it's about their partner, some people would say it's about their mother-in-law, all kinds of different reasons. Yeah? And of course, we have to be honest about the fact that we live in an age where we might believe we have gender equality, but we do not have gender equality. Now, there is a biological inequality that men can't have children. I know that Arnold Schwarzenegger did with Danny DeVito in the film Junior some years ago, but that was a kind of an outlier, and it wasn't real. So women are the ones who have children. But society, rather than compensating for that tends towards penalising women for this biological obligation, if you will. And so one thing which has contributed to this is this hard link between marriage and childbearing. A big difference between between Europe and East Asia is that the link between marriage and childbearing is pretty weak. Right? So in Europe, in many countries, the majority of first births actually occur outside of marriage. Now, there's two ways you can look at this. You go, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the breakdown of family and so. But actually, people are quite happy about this. They don't, and because what it means is that people try out relationships. You can try, you move in with somebody, you cohabit with somebody, and if it doesn't work out, well, you just move on. You go to somebody else. You try different things. But of course, if your first step is marriage, that's a different thing entirely. Right? So there's this hard link between marriage and childbearing. Of course, things are changing. And of course, you don't need me to say that just in the last week, different movements, different changes in attitudes towards the family and towards unions have changed here in Taiwan. Yeah, first in Asia. And so I think it's a matter of when rather than if these changes are going to be rolled out in different parts of the world. Having said that, of course, like the day after in Taiwan, we had the first same-sex union in Hong Kong, we had a problem because there was an advert with two men holding hands at the airport, and the MTR and the airport authority said, get it off, we don't like it. So we've still got a long way to go in terms of these attitudes about changing family systems. And also, we need to be realistic about women's public and private sphere roles. Taiwan, the top ranked in Asia for gender equality, one of the top ranked in the world for gender equality. But that's just because there's a lot of female MPs. Right? It's not about because of gender roles. It's not because, I'm very sorry to say this, it's not because Taiwanese men spend all their time ironing and cooking and cleaning at home, because that's not the case, right? This is about public sphere roles and not about private sphere roles. Yeah? And so, in fact, here, the Time Use Survey, that's not just me saying this, from 2004, Taiwanese women spent on average 15.6 hours a week on domestic work and childcare. Taiwanese men, 2.2 hours a week. If it makes you feel better, it's much lower in Japan. So Taiwanese men still do more work at home than Japanese men. So we still have this incomplete social revolution. And this is a project that we finished a few years ago when we did some qualitative interviews in Taiwan with couples with one child or two children. And I don't know whether or not these may seem familiar, but I'll read a few of these out. So this is a woman with one child. She said, I wish when he comes back from work, I like him for it to be happy and playing with the kids. Then he plays a kind father role. But usually when he comes back, he's worn out and just wants to watch TV. Something like that. And then I look at him and I feel of course, I feel, wow, I've been caring for my child for a whole day. It's so tough. Why do you look so tired when you come back home from work? Here's another example here. If here's the person who is very actively involved in children, I would be looking forward to having another baby, right? So this is somebody who would have another child, okay? What does she say? But he's not. Sometimes he's at home with the child rather than the office, but he does his own business, surfing with his mobile phone. The child is left alone. He doesn't play with him, interact with him. So I feel the child is just my responsibility. I've got to take care of him, keep him with me. I just say, forget about it. I don't want to have a child now. Really, I don't want to, because I feel the pressure is all on me, and so on and so forth, right? This is just one particular story. Now, this is important because, of course, we think about, well, what can the government do about this, right? What can the government do to stop poor Hui Chun's husband messing about on his bloody mobile phone all night and look and be a bit more active? The government can't do anything about that. It's very difficult for the government to do anything about that. But this, for her, is a primary reason why she doesn't want to have a second child. Yeah. So just making her feel guilty about not having a second child is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And also, we can be careful that sometimes policies can have the influence that we don't expect. So in Spain, also a place with very low fertility rates, not known for particularly high rates of gender equality in the home as well, they introduced a new big policy where everybody, all men, could be entitled to paternity leave. Right? And this was actually to try to encourage people to have more children. So men would stay at home with their wives, partners, and look after their children. And a lot of men took this up, and then a few years later they did some follow-up research, and they found that among the men who wanted to stay at home, who stayed at home to look after their children, they wanted to have fewer children because they realized that staying at home and looking after your children is bloody hard work. And so the idea that they would have to do it again and again for a third time, oh, no, 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 I'm done now. So this is where a policy should be a pro-gender equity policy that we would all support. Yeah, that's brilliant. Get men more involved in childbearing and child rearing, and you know, this would be a great thing. And of course, it's actually backfired because the core issue, the core problem of gender roles at home wasn't addressed. Yeah, it was just a policy implementation from above. So when you look at it in this way, that's why I think we could safely say that there's infinite pathways, there's infinite reasons why different people say they want to do different things. And of course, this shouldn't surprise us. One of the big problems with any kind of demographic or any quantitative analysis is that we're always looking for general relationships. Got it? Yeah, we're always looking for general relationships. The reality is, of all the billions of people on this earth, we are all kind of different. I'm not going to get emotional about this, but we are. We all cherish certain things more than others. We value different things more than others. So of course, when we make decisions which demographers measure, or that policymakers want to deal with, that policymakers want to manipulate, of course, everybody will be different. Whether it's about wanting to move, or wanting to have a pension, or wanting to have children, or wanting to get married, or whatever it is. So we have to be mindful of that. And of course, it will operate at different levels. Yeah, you may have something inside of you, your own particular belief, that will all be different. Yeah, but then there'll also be other issues, other policies, other situations which will affect and apply to different people in different ways. Yeah, so that's why it becomes very difficult. And as I said, there's some areas that policies cannot reach. And this is one thing I think is really, really important. The government tends to get the blame for things when they don't, you know, in population terms, when things don't go as they should do. And they seem to be like they're the primary responsibility. They have the primary responsibility for this. The fact of the matter is, you spend a lot more time interacting with your boss than you do the government. Yeah, that the private sector, employers, have got just as big a role, in fact, I would say a more important role to play in supporting people's aspirations in terms of work and life, work and family balance, than the government ever can. And actually, they can do it in a proactive way. We move into a situation where, you know, in the late 20th century, we had lots and lots of people. And all we wanted people to be was healthy and have a bit of education, so we could put them to work, yeah, and make things and make stuff to send all around the world. Now our economy is completely different, right? Taiwan, Britain, Hong Kong, we don't really make a lot of stuff anymore, yeah? We have a service sector, yeah? We need to prize higher order production, yeah? And so getting and keeping the right people is really, really critical, rather than just having loads and loads of people coming through the system. So that's why we also need to think indirectly about this, yeah? If people are saying, well, I would like to have more children, but I have to spend so much money on tutoring, so my child can get a better chance to go to this particular university, so he or she can then get a better chance to get this or that particular job. Yeah, well, then the whole system might be wrong, you might say, you know. Why is it necessary to have all of these cram schools and tutoring schools? Yeah? Why not just invest more heavily in the education system as it is, right? Or reform the systems for getting into university? About housing or labour rights, even elder care policy. I know this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but you might say, well, you know, I'd like to have another child, but I've got to take care of my parents and my parents-in-law. So if the government comes in and says, well, I'll tell you what, don't worry, we'll take care of your parents. We'll take care of your parents-in-law. Yeah? Now, you could say, well, then that just creates another problem, because that means that the government has got to then invest more in long-term care or whatever. But of course, the reality is that the kind of diseases that our parents and grandparents are going to be having over the next, and we're going to be having over the next century, is not going to be something that we as children are going to be able to take care of adequately. There will need to be more institutional and government support. So my argument is that we can do all of these things, and we should be doing all of these things, but we shouldn't be doing it just to increase the fertility rate. Yeah, we should be doing it because it's kind of like the right thing to do, and it's what people say that they would like. Yeah, it's about what the government and what people and what private sector should be doing it. And I think it would probably, actually, if we did all of these things, which people say, well, this is the reasons why I feel I don't have the number of children I would like to have, then by definition, you would expect fertility to go up a bit. But that's not the reason why we should do it. We should just do it because it's in line with what people want. Now, of course, you may say, Stuart, it's very informal, you can call me Stuart, that's very kind. Stuart, you're crazy, crazy man. This is never going to happen, right? It's too big, it's too complicated, right? It's too messy, right? It's too radical. But of course, the thing is, it's been done before, right? In terms of in the European system, why was the Swedish welfare state brought in? Yeah, we all know that Sweden has a very, very generous welfare system. Big, a lot of state intervention in different areas, a lot of various different activities. Very high emphasis on gender equality, maternity leave, whatever. This was brought in between the war because fertility was very low, because they were worried about very low fertility, and they wanted to get more women into work. Yeah, to drive industrial growth, to drive economic growth. It happened before, but we've just forgotten about it. This was a pro-fertility policy. In France has kind of a high fertility rate. Yeah, and there's a very interesting article in your brochures here about this. And this again is because of emphasis upon gender roles around protection, labor protection, but also this idea that if you want to have children, if you have children, then we're going to support you. We're on your side, yeah? And it doesn't matter if you're a single mom. It doesn't matter if you're a same-sex union. It doesn't matter if you're divorced, remarried, whatever, right? You're having a child, and part of that, and that child is a citizen of France and will be a citizen of France in the future, and we will support that, yeah? It's very difficult for me as an Englishman to say this, but the French have got it right, okay? And I think that we could move to a situation where if we've got fewer and fewer young people, you know what? I don't think we can be picky about what kind of families we're going to support and what kind of families we're not going to support. Yeah, I think we should see children as a social good. And of course, so it's not. I'm not just saying that it's not just happened in Europe. Oh, this is a long way away, right? This is in Sweden or France. You know what? It happened here as well. And it happened in all other places in this part of the world, that we can learn from family planning programs. Yeah, fertility in Taiwan in the 1950s and 60s was extremely high, 6 or 7 kids, right? And what happened? It came down. Maybe it came down a bit too far for some people, but it came down very, very quickly. And how did it happen? It didn't just happen because someone gave along and gave some condoms to men or the pill to women. Didn't happen like that. That's a linear way of thinking about this. It happened because the aspirations of people were aligned with the policy. There was a comprehensive, very, very comprehensive family planning policy, family planning system. But also lots of other things happened as well. The economy grew, the economy changed, you know, urbanization, development, education, female rights, etc., etc. So all of these things were aligned. And the outcome was that fertility declined. Now, of course, that wasn't the reason why China, Taiwan industrialized, wasn't to lower fertility, but it was because the expectations, what people wanted, were aligned with this family planning program. People wanted to have fewer children, so all of these policies together drove through fewer children. Yeah? So maybe in the future, if people want to have more children, we could do a similar thing. And as I say, Taiwan, another thing we should be proud of in Taiwan, Taiwan had one of the most comprehensive and one of the most successful family planning programs in the world. People would come from all over the world to come and see what was happening in Taiwan, right? And be going to see and how this can be applied to other parts of the world. So it can be done. It can be done in a radical way. Now, of course, the government system was a bit different back then than it is today, but that's not to say that we can't aspire to these kinds of changes. And if we go back to, this is our kind of, I would say Bible, but this view of the kind of family planning world that we say, that what family planning should be about is about enabling people to, meet their own individual aspirations, right? To respect the dignity of all persons and their right to choose the number, spacing, timing, and birth of their own children. Now, in the past, this has always been to support people to have fewer children, yeah? Through support, because in many countries, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, people say they want to have fewer children than they have. But there's no reason why we can't turn this around and say, well, if you want more children than you have, then we can support you in order to do this. So, to conclude, and I know the front row is going to be very glad because they're worried I'm going to go over, but I think I'm going to be on time here, right? So, when we think of the traditional population problem of aging and decline and stagnation, you know what? We can fix that, I think, because we've got lots of other dimensions we can draw upon, yeah? Lots of different policies. Not just about making you feel guilty or forcing people or encouraging people to have more children, but through other different ways, through productivity, reform, and so on. And actually, Taiwan has got good policies. It's going on the right way, without a doubt. One of the best in the region, I would say. The real problem, then, is that aspirations are not being met. And this is this kind of issue with the gap as an indicator of between what people would like to do and what people would actually want. Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, I might say I want to buy a Ferrari, right, or want to drive in F1 as an aspiration, and I can't do that. Yeah, it's not really the government's job to, certainly not in Hong Kong, the government don't really do anything, but it's not the government's job to step in and say, okay, Stuart, I'm going to help you become an F1 driver, right? This is a bit more basic than that. It's like, I've got an aspiration to kind of live in my own house or to have children. It's not really asking the world, is it? And I think the governments can really do that. And so we should have more of a rights-based approach for a better society. But my postscript is that it's not going to last forever. It may not last forever. At the moment, we're in a good policy space because people say they want to get married, right? People say they want to have 2 children. People say they want to combine work and family. It's not guaranteed to last forever, right? That if situations and circumstances stay bad for a long time, then people's normative views, people's attitudes will change. And we're already starting to see that in Hong Kong, yeah? That fertility preferences are now falling below 2. People don't want to have 2 children anymore. People are saying they want to have 1 child. Now, in mainland China, of course, they've got an even bigger problem because they would say, many people say they want to have 1 child. And of course, a lot of that is the legacy of the birth control restrictions over the last 30 years. So in China, mainland China, they're going to find that very, very, very difficult. So I would argue that we don't have a lot of time to waste on this. Demography tends to be a slow-burning issue, right, in terms of fertility and mortality and whatever. But I don't think we've got any time to waste. I think we've got to get on with this now. And believe me, being where we are in Taiwan with the lowest fertility rate, or one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, for that reason alone, because of this gap between aspiration and reality, that's not really where we want to be, I would say. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you, Stu, for giving us such a inspiring talk and look at this particular fertilitative problem from different angles and introduce a multidimensional way to think about and resolve this particular issues. And while Stu is actually drink a bit of water, take a little bit of rest, I want to have a little bit interaction with our audience today. I have heard from the coordinator of the foundation that we have really a very diverse demographic audience today, and including some of you in front of the Facebook. So I kind of want to do a little survey and census about the age of our population. But I know age is such a personal things for women. So I'm going to do just to know age group, perhaps a little bit under a certain age group, right? I heard there's a lot of young crowd in our audience. So I'm going to ask for the audience here, if you are 40 years old, please raise your hand. 你40岁以下的请举手。40岁。40 years old, wow. Keep your hands up. If you're below 30, please keep your hands. 小于30岁的请还是举手。我已经不是了啊。然后小于20岁的，麻烦您还继续举手。Below 20, okay, wow, we have someone below 20, great, very brave. And we have below 10. Wow, we got one. We have a baby in the audience. Let's give them a applause. Awesome. If you're on Facebook, please give a like and share it with your age. So we really do have a fantastic crowd here that have all age. So I'm going to take a little bit privilege of being the moderator to start the first question before we have different age group to come and ask more questions or share your thoughts on this talk today. I want to see, I'm below the younger crowd, so I'm going to ask something the younger people struggle. And we have this phrase in Taiwan, talk about bread and love. And it's constantly for young people nowadays thinking about, we want to have bread before we have love, which is different. Well, when we see in the soap opera, love first and then bread. So I want to just kind of see how you think about this bread and love balance and bread and love struggle among the young people, and how do you have some advice for the younger generation how to come along and tackle this issue?
Well, so I can add to being English and male to being old as well. So I don't really have my kind of whether or not I'm qualified to say about this, but I think that so. When, as demographers, we do tend to forget that a lot of this is determined by human emotion, is by love. We're not very good at measuring love. And I know that Guy at the back is a demographer, and he's going to be very embarrassed that I'm going to start talking about love now. But when we do all these surveys about fertility preferences, fertility intentions, what would you say you'd like to do? Of course, this is based on a very rational model, right? Very rational economic view of looking at the world. But of course, that changes when you fall in love. It also changes when you fall out of love as well, right? Things can happen. So there's very little that the government can do and that the private sector can do about love, right? That's just... And I don't think we should be doing anything about that. I don't think we should be getting in the way of love when it occurs, to refer to what's happened in the last couple of weeks here in Taiwan. So love is will be an individual issue, an individual choice, and there's very little that would be done to change that. But about bread, that's when we can do something. That's when the public sector and the private sector can work together and think, well, is this the future that we want in terms of the future of work, the future of the labour force, right? In Britain, we have something called 0-hour contracts. I don't know whether you have that here, which is that you basically you have a job and you are contracted to work no hours, 0. But then on Monday morning or Sunday night, you'll get an email or a text on your phone to say, right, we want you to work from 9 till 12 on Wednesday and then 3 till 7 on Friday or whatever, you know. And that's a 0-hour contract. So this is what we call this fragile work. Now, at some point, so in terms of bread to support your love, that's very difficult, right? How you can use that kind of instability, that fragility at work to support your love is almost impossible. So I think that we can, as the public and the private sector, we can do a lot more on the bread side, yeah? But we don't just think of bread in terms of money, but in terms of broader systems of support. But then to go back to love as well, although falling in love is one thing, but if you're in love, I can't believe I'm a demographer talking like this as well. These two demographers here as well are going to be very embarrassed about this. But you know that you know, sometimes you could say, well, loving can be about sharing as well. And you know, if you're in, you know, the quotes that I've given there, that clearly there's something going on in that couple that might, you know, that the government can't do something about, but the man can do something about. You know, to observe that maybe this situation is, maybe I might be being a little bit selfish. Maybe the circumstances are not quite right. Maybe my wife, my partner, could be happy if I change my behaviour a little bit. Now, part of that could be to do with work. You know, you can blame work and you can say, well, no, I have to stay at work until very late. So when I come home, I can't do any childcare. So that's a work issue. But then at some point, maybe you've got to stand up and say, well, maybe I've got to make a change myself, right? So I think that it's a useful way to think of these different approaches into it. Yeah.
That's very important of the research you have done in Taiwan to actually highlight some of the individual micro level of the struggle of a family. And then you just propose that we should also, while we can intervene people's love affairs, but we can create a culture of understanding, sharing family, the risk of starting a family, the complexity, the work bearing of actually taking care of the family. So I think that's a very important research that highlights some of the problem. And I want to bring my question to a more macro level. And I think we talk about the micro and then the macro, maybe even the meso level, how that individual preferences and connect to the institution level. One thing you mentioned, you know, in the talk today about how important is in the information. You know, do you feel that currently the information that we have on the population trajectories or our concerns is accurate based on what we know, what we learned today? And is there any way the government should actually to pay more attention on, to prioritize? You keep on mentioning action today because population is a type of problem that's irreversible. Whatever you do today, it would really set up what's happening in the future, or what is currently happening in our population composition. It's what happened in the past, and we can't really change that right away. So could you give us some pointer and highlight some of the crucial priority that we should act now?
Yeah, I think in terms of the measures, to start, because there's two things. The first, in terms of the measures, that sometimes our measures are not very helpful. You know, when we, for example, I talk about how we measure aging, right? We talk about the number of people aged over 65 relative to the number of people aged 20 to 64. This is a crazy way to measure aging, you know, because it assumes that there's something that happens when you turn 65. It assumes that everyone aged over 65 is dependent. It assumes that everybody who's aged 20 to 64 is working, is in the labour force, which of course is not the case either. So we need to have, I think, a better view of actually defining what the problem actually is and whether or not it is a problem. And maybe as demographers, we need to take a step back completely and say, well, look, if we're worried about pensions, then we've got to measure purely within the pension system. We have to measure what goes in, what comes out, what the actuarial forecasts are for the future, and then that's it. The other problem, I think, is that far too much of this policy narrative has been left to people who do quantitative work like myself. Then actually what we need to do is, if we want to try to find on an individual level what people want, we need to talk to people. And this isn't going to be just some harmonized questionnaire that we run all over the world, right? Although that helps. we need to have individual conversations to find out what's going on in people's lives, right? And until we do that, the policies that we develop may not be, or probably not going to be aligned to particular needs and particular viewpoints. In terms of actions, you know, it's difficult to know where to start, right? Because if you see that rather than being the problem itself, it's a downstream problem or downstream effect of lots of other problems, then it's, as I say, it's hard to know where to start. But you know, to take an obvious example, we know the impact upon having children for women's work, and so we need to have I think, you know, improved policies around family-friendly workplaces. But then again, it's important to realise that not everybody works in a corporation, right? They will need support for SMEs, for small medium enterprises as well, which is actually the majority of people are going to be working in such enterprise, and for the self-employed. So there'll be kind of policies needed for that particular area. I'm being told to shut up, so I'll
All right. I start to see people have, you know, the face of want to ask question. And because we have a lot of people in the audience today, so I'm going to go around the room. And please keep your questions within 1 minute so that we can allow more people to ask the question. So I'm opening the floors. Yes, we have the first.
In the beginning, you said, hi. In the beginning, you said you're going to talk about immigration a little bit later, so I want you to talk about that.
Would you like to address briefly?
Yeah, that was what I wrote that down. If I didn't get the poster here, that's exactly what I was going to say, right? So it's okay, yeah, it's all right. So I would argue, so immigration in and of itself is neither a good thing or a bad thing. It's just another demographic process, right? You will not fix population aging through immigration. It's not possible. Because just the raw numbers of people you would have to be getting in year after year after year, because of course immigrants get old as well, right? So in order to maintain this support ratio, to maintain the number of people aged one age to another age, you would need to have an enormous number of people. Literally hundreds of millions of people would have to move to Taiwan to keep that support ratio the same. Now, that's not to say, of course, that migration can't play an important role in this. There will be, in certain sectors, for example, elderly care, right, is without a doubt going to be something which grows tremendously around the world. Everyone's got this faith, oh no, we'll all be looked after by robots and stuff. I don't believe it, right? We'll still need people to help us. It's not a job that people want to do, okay? So that will be an area where migration will play a role. Now, in the long term, again, you see, migration becomes an immediate solution to this. But then you could say, but then why is it a job that nobody wants to do? Why don't we try to make it a job that people want to do? Why don't we professionalize it? You know, put diplomas, you know, so you can get proper diplomas and proper training around this. Okay. So it's sometimes seen as a kind of cheap solution to a big problem that we have internally. Other skill sectors, other skill gaps certainly exist, which migration itself can solve, can work on. In terms of love, people fall in love with people from other countries, you know, and that's a migration issue as well. Yeah. So migration is just is a tool that feeds into this, but it's not the solution. It on a demographic level is just simply not the solution.
All right, Professor.
Well, I'm getting older and older, so I'm really worried about the future of Taiwan. And sitting next to me is the representative of the Swiss office, and he just told me that 25% of the Swiss population today are immigrants. So why isn't immigration a solution to the problem? In other words, do you think that Taiwan should adopt a more aggressive, active migration policy?
So Switzerland, so European countries, migration in Switzerland is a different context to migration in Taiwan, right? In terms of the regulatory framework, right? In terms of when it comes about if you say about immigration, you say, right, what do we want to achieve? Okay. let's say, what's the population of Taiwan now? It's like 20-something million, 23 million, right? If we say, okay, I want to keep the population at 23 million, well then you've got to have through immigration, yeah? You might be able to increase the fertility rate to keep people, people having a few more children. But the way to keep the population constant would be through immigration, right? But then you might say, but then what's the point of keeping the population 25 million? Why does the population need to be 23, 24 million? Yeah, would it not be just as okay? Would it not be just as acceptable to have a population of 20 million? Which is older, but is also more highly educated, more productive, is healthier. You know, why would you need to have all of these people just for the sake of having them? You know, similarly with, as I said, and that's the point about the ratio between the young and the old. You know, okay, so you could say, well, it's not just about having 24 million, but we need to just keep bringing in people aged 20 to 25 or 20 to 30. But then what happens when they turn 31 or 41 or 51 or 61? How do you manage that as well? Yeah, so immigration has very powerful effects on particular subsectors, but it's until we actually define what we're worried about, what the problem is. You know, otherwise we end up dealing with this in kind of, dare I say it, kind of biblical terms. You know, that our population defines us. Yeah, that a country with 50 million people is stronger than a country with 25 million people, or a country with 1.3 billion people over the water is 20 times strong. Well, that doesn't work like that. You know, it doesn't need to be like that at all.
Good. We have question. Maybe I move over there. We have, go around the circles. Yeah. Yes. We have yes.
I heard press reports have been that chemicals in the environment, specifically pesticides, affect physical fertility, specifically male fertility. Is this a factor, do you think?
There's, without a doubt, we know that there are studies. Actually, I remove that without a doubt now. There are studies, particularly in Denmark, which shows that male fertility is lower and can be affected. And of course, it's an important issue in particular relation, on the micro level, right? As female fertility, female age of childbearing, I wasn't expecting a question on this. As the female age of childbearing goes up and up and up, then obviously there will be more and more issues around the ability to conceive. And it is, again, through a kind of a sexist viewpoint, which is what it is that women tend to be the one who get the blame, right? Women are the one who says, oh, well, you're too old, you're having children too late, of course. And actually, in terms of both the difficulties of conceiving and also any kind of problems that result of later childbearing, is just as likely to be male rather than female. So I think that's an issue. But that's really on the individual level. I think there was some studies done in France which says, look, if everybody who wanted to conceive at older ages was given all of the support in order to conceive, then the impact on the fertility rate would be very, very, very small. It will be very, very, very small because it's still at this older age. But that's not to say that we shouldn't do it, because that's individual aspirations and individual choices. In terms of a kind of society-wide sub-fecundity, as we would say. Sorry, that's a nice word. Don't get to say that very often in a big audience. One argument to say that if you're male with lower male fertility is that you just need to try to have sex more often. I can't believe I'm talking about this now. So there is one. That's one way round it. But I'm just going to stop.
All right. I saw some hand. We have yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Okay. I actually have one feedback and one question. The first one is even though we want to boost fertility rate, but actually I think not every woman is encouraged For example, like women with like hereditary disease, women with mental issues, or like murder or something. So it seems like we are encouraging like certain types of women to have children, and it's like, I think it's my observation. And the second question is like, even you say think indirectly. Sorry, I'm super nervous. And so I'm thinking that, do you think that universal basic income could be a solution to it?
There's no need to be nervous at all, because those are two really good questions. I think that there's the history of family policy, the history of family planning is linked to the history of eugenics as well, and is linked to having the right people having fewer children, or the wrong people having fewer children and the right people having more children. In Singapore, I really hope there are going to be people in Singapore watching this, but in Singapore, much more recently than you might consider, the difference between, well, if you're a woman with a degree, we'll support you, you have more kids. If you're not, then that's going to be a different issue as well. So we have to be very, very careful about this. My own personal view is that if we take this rights-based approach, then it doesn't matter who you are. If you want to have, and please don't think that I'm saying that some people should be encouraged more than others. That's absolutely opposite of what I would say. That everybody should be able to realize their aspirations, and if that's to have no children, then that's your business, and nobody should put any pressure on you to do any otherwise. Now, when we move into, there's a point, I think, later on we talk about other different groups, we move into ethical areas, and that's not really for me to get involved with. But those, if we would just talk about the general population, then we would say that it's just about whatever your aspirations, what you want to achieve. In terms of universal basic income, well, the link between universal basic income and fertility preferences or fertility plan has not been done yet, because it's so new. We've only had a few experiments in a few places, and we don't really know what's going to happen in those. My suspicion would be that it would support fertility, because you've got, you have a basic income, you have a safety net, which if everything else goes wrong, that you're still going to have some basic, as you say, a basic income. So I think that it would be done. But again, I wouldn't necessarily bring in universal basic income to increase the fertility rate. I bring in universal basic income because it's a good idea, and it actually has positive implications. So as the studies would suggest, have positive implications for other areas of individual self-worth, the economy, of labour force participation, and maybe it will increase fertility. But anyway, I'm going to put that on one of my slides. That's very nice, actually. I like that idea. Right. That's really good.
Our young people are really thinking, well, about their future. We actually got one question from the internet, so I'm going to read these questions, and then I think there's some hand here, and got one more question there. So the question from the Facebook is the private role. I think you emphasize the importance of private sector, and he says if all the private companies can, increase the employees' benefits and encourage them have regular holidays, and even sometimes no work day for going home, make babies, would that improve the fraternity? And maybe we'll collect one more question from
I'll just answer, yes.
Yes. All right. Okay. That's a very straightforward question. Yes, please.
Hello, Professor Baston. I was very excited for this talk today because I'm doing a PhD on this topic, so low fertility in Taiwan. I've got lots of questions. But I think my main point would be that I understand that you're emphasizing all these other different effects of low fertility, but I have to disagree that low fertility is a problem in and of itself because of what Professor Liu alluded to, which is negative population momentum. If we maintain low birth rates for a significant period, in 20 years' time, the number of people having children will be half as many as today, and so on and so on. And so it's not simply the negative social effects later on, it's the negative population momentum that will be built into the population structure over the long term.
Excellent question. Can I collect one more there? And okay, please.
I'd like to reinforce the first two questions. Yesterday, since you have been doing the research on fertility rate in Taiwan, yesterday I was told 1/3 of our babies, of the Taiwanese babies, are actually made by foreign brides. So it sounds like aging and the fertility rate could be two separate issues. Without these foreign brides, well, you can just easily imagine what our birth rate would be. Okay.
We have in the audience two hands over there. Yes. You can just, I will collect these 4 questions and address together. Yeah, go ahead, please. Just 2 hands.
Yeah, hello, thank you very much for your lecture. I have a question because I believe that there was just a question asked about the role of the private sector. I believe you also emphasized the role of the private sector. We're also talking about policy, which I assume comes from the government. What I'm missing here a little bit is the sphere of civil society. Because I believe traditionally in European countries, it were the labor unions who actually strived to improve rights. And who is going to provide the benefits? Not the private sector. Of course, they're never going to give any free benefits to anybody. They're not going to establish any rights. So I was wondering what your opinion was about who the agent of change is. Who is the person who is actually going to actualize these rights?
Okay. One last question, the gentleman.
Stuart, if I may, you did not mention religion as a factor in the low fertility rates across the Asia-Pacific region, but there are countries where that does not apply, and they may well be sources for immigration. The Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, where the fertility rate is not a problem, rather the reverse, and because of either religious beliefs or economic factors, people still feel they need to have lots of kids to provide for them in their old age. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Okay. So, Stuart.
Okay, right. What I actually said, okay, so what I said was that we shouldn't forget about fertility for 2 reasons, right? The first is that, and then I spent most of the time talking about aspirations, right? But what I actually said was that having a fertility rate which is not as low as it is now will make things easier, all right? Without a doubt, okay? Yes, negative population momentum is an issue, right? But again, we need to have a grown-up conversation about what's the natural population of Taiwan, right? Is it 23 million? Is it like the peak? Well, why should it be? Why should it be, right? What is going to be the effect of population decline or a stagnation or a population decline in the medium term? It's going to put a lot of pressure on various different services and whatever, right? But that requires a more nuanced view than just saying that population decline is very bad. If the fertility rate in Taiwan was 1.5, would that make it easier than if it's now 1.1? Yeah, it probably will. Yeah, for sure. Okay, but we shouldn't necessarily just try to make it 1.5 for the sake of making it 1.5. We need to consider what the long-term issues are related to that. Hello, hi there, hi there, hi. Foreign brides. Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to recognise the demographic contribution of foreign brides and migrants wherever they are. You know, and childbearing is just one of those things. In my country, in the United Kingdom, there's a very toxic attitude around about migrants, children of migrants. You know, but of course, if it wasn't for migration and childbearing of migration, then the aging would be worse, fertility would be lower, and then complain about that as well. So I think what we need to do is to just recognise that as citizens, however defined, everybody makes a contribution economically, socially, and demographically. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Civil society. Yeah, I think that's right. I'm not quite so I mean, I agree with you. I think that there's certainly there has to be a role for the third sector in this, without a doubt. I'm not quite so pessimistic about business. I think that there might come a kind of tipping point where business goes, you know, we can't really get away with this much longer. You know, maybe something's not quite right. There might be some forward-thinking managers, executives who come in and see this as basically you see it as an HR policy. You know, why do I want the best people to come and work for me? How do I want to keep them? And maybe that's not just only going to be about salary and the initial package, but it'll be about long-term issues. And we see that certain companies investing in this as well, you know, but they do, and that's why I made this remark about SMEs. It's very easy for IBM or for HSBC to put a nursery on the second floor, you know, to show that we're trying to help people, you know, or say to go home. But if you're a 4-person business, then supporting a family is going to be very difficult. So there'll need to be, I think, this, you know, public, private, and third sector. I agree with that. And then the last thing was about religion. Yeah. So the link between, I think the link between religion, the direct link between religion and fertility, I would say, is generally surprisingly weak. I think that the link between fertility and religion is often mediated by other things relating to, say, economic status, for example. The biggest, you know, to tackle the elephant in the room, people talk about Islamic fertility. The biggest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. The fertility rate there is 2. So there's not a fundamental link between religion and fertility. You mentioned about the Philippines. You know, the Philippines is a Catholic country, and fertility is pretty high, it's 2.2. But then Spain and Italy are Catholic countries, and Portugal, and the fertility rate there is 1. So it's not just about religion, yeah, whether it's the operation of the church or whether or not it's other factors and the diaspora nature or whatever in the Philippines. But also we need to be more kind of, you know, I think more thoughtful about what our environment is. I mean, I can't remember who we were talking to yesterday, but somebody was, I think, one of the volunteers, and I said that, you know, the fertility rate in Thailand is about the same as the fertility rate in Japan. It's very low. In Vietnam, the total fertility rate in Vietnam is less than 2. In the big cities in Vietnam, it's 1.2. It's very, very low, right? So I think that we need to be aware that our expectations of what fertility is in certain places, whether it's linked to countries, whether it's linked to levels of development. Nepal, as an area of, as a least developed country, has low fertility. It's one of the poorest places, one of the poorest countries in Asia, has very low fertility. So I think we need to kind of change our expectations about the relationship between something we think is linked to fertility, whether it's education or development or religion, and then the actual circumstances. And then we learn more about those intermediate factors, I would say.
Thank you for the question. I just learned we'll be given a few extra minutes because we still have so many hands in the audience. So maybe we'll take 2 last questions from the audience. We have 1 question, and all right, there's one in the back, so let's give the opportunity. So 1 question here, and then there. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Professor. In States, high school graduates get a gap year. They get a gap year so that they can get part-time jobs. They can travel abroad. What if the Ministry of Education in Taiwan also launched a policy that encourages a gap year, so our high school graduates get to maybe work and They get to think upon family situations and financial difficulties whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you for our young, persons speak up for their generations. Yes.
Hello, I'm Gopal. What is your comment on making abortion laws very strict so that it will slightly increase the fertility rate of the country? That's it.
Sorry, I just learned there's one more question from the Facebook. As you may know, our country has recently passed the law to legalize the same marriage, regardless of religious, and based on your expertise, would you consider this as a potential threat to our already aging society? Okay, so 3 questions from the audience.
Okay, I'll think about, I'll come back to that. Okay, gap year. Okay, so I mean, whether or not it's just about a gap year, there are, maybe we can, I think it's an interesting thought, right? And I think but it talks to us a little bit about the way that we've done life for a long time, right? So our life course trajectories are that we go to school, and then we go to college, and then we get a job, and then we maybe get married, maybe not, and then have a kid, and then maybe have another kid, and then we get older, and then maybe we get a pension and stuff like that. And this is this kind of fixed life course, and we always just assume that this is the right thing to do. But of course, as an education, somebody who works in education, sometimes we might say, well, actually, when is the best time to get a degree? When's the best time to do a PhD, for example? Well, maybe it's better to, go to college, then get a job, then come back and get another degree or do something else, or train on the job or whatever, And it's based around this old idea that we had the same job for all of our lives. And that's kind of going now, that we will have different jobs over the course of our lives. So I think that that ideas like that of lifelong learning, vocational, thinking slightly differently to this, school, college, job, baby world might be actually kind of a helpful way to do that. I don't think it probably won't, you wouldn't do it again, and I keep saying this, we wouldn't do that. Giving people gap years is probably not going to increase fertility rates, right? And that shouldn't be the reason to do it, but it's in and of itself, it's it's probably a good thing to do to change our approaches, right? Abortion, no, that's a very simple answer. And this is, it's too easy to complain about America these days, so I'm not going to say anything about what's happening in Alabama and Georgia, places like this. When you tighten abortion laws, they don't stop abortions, they make abortions unsafe. It's as simple as that. Yeah, that's the problem. And it's just not the right thing to, it's just not the right thing to do. Okay, now that's a normative statement, but I don't mind making such normative statements. Okay. Now then, so same-sex, well, okay, no, I shouldn't have, because this reason, I think it's this issue, so same-sex unions and aging, right? I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that, we can talk on a moral or a philosophical question about what people shouldn't be able to do, and whether the government has the right to support you or to block you from doing something, whether the church has the right to support you or doing something. And then we have this view, the modernization of family all over the world. This is the direction of travel. It's going to happen anyway, right? And it is happening anyway. So you might as well. It's easier to go with the flow. But again, I would go back to this example. This is just wanting to be making me annoyed to talk about France again. But that's why in France, you would say that if people are in love, and they want to create a household together, and they want to have, I don't personally see what the problem with that is. If they want to have children, either through, or they want to through adoption, surrogacy, or whatever means of having children, then I don't see how we can. We should. That comes back to your question. Who was? Yeah, that's right. About picking and choosing who should and shouldn't have children. Why shouldn't Why shouldn't two women raise a child, or two men raise a child? Sociologically, our studies always show that the outcomes of children born in same-sex unions always do better than heterosexual unions. And part of that, again, to come back to this intermediate factor, is because the incomes of same-sex unions tend to be higher than the average heterosexual union, right? So if we want more children, and if we just, but it's not even about having more children, it's just about citizens and our citizens being happy and our future generation of citizens. And, I just don't think that we can afford to be picky about who should or shouldn't be having children, and why one child should be any more valued than another child from any kind of relationship. Every child should be given the complete. I'm not going to say no child left behind, because we're not going to say that. But every child should have the same opportunity as far as possible to have the best future.
All right, thank you, Professor Storr, today to really tackle so many different questions on this very important issue on populations, in particular in Taiwan. And I want to thank the Taipei Salon to provide this platform to gather a very diverse crowd, aging from 1-year-old baby to many different age groups of people, and also the audience in front of Facebook, to talk about, direct intervention or policy, where we are in our policy, as well as indirect approach of understanding aspirations and how we tackle this particular issue through a joint effort by government, private sectors, civil society, and ourselves, young people and different age group of people, to address this particular issue. So please join me and thanks Storr today for this very inspirational talk. And I hope you'll come back more often for more talks and for more brainstorming of shaping our future. Thank you so much. Thank you for Taipei Salon. Thank you.